This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
And with the fall of Eredal, which is now called Shadar Logoth because it's filled with a special sort of evil, Manetheren now becomes the front line.
Oh, I did a little bit of research into Eredal and the mist and where that comes from.
Yeah.
Remember how in the last book, Padan Fain is using the souls of the Trollocs and the people he corrupts to feed Mashadar?
That's right.
I think that the misty white substance that comprises Mashadar is actually the souls of the people in the city of Shadar Logoth.
Oh, interesting. That sounds a ton like the Black Wind too, or Mashin Shin.
Mashin Shin. Well,
I think it's called the Black Wind also.
Yes, yeah.
But that's a different thing.
That's a different thing, and that arises from the Dark One because it's a result of the corruption and the taint of the Dark One. So that's more of a bleeding from the structure. They seem to be similar, but not really. I can't find any link between the two of them, other than maybe like
the creepy whispering and
right. Well, I was thinking more like parallel evolution, that you have this sort of two evil beings who kind of want to occupy a space, and they do that through creating a misty, windy. And I think mist is very different than wind, right? You have this black wind that sort of bubbles and blows versus a mist that sort of floats and drifts. Sort of a jellyfish versus a shark is how I tend to think of them.
But they both seem to get their power and whatever intelligence they have from an amalgam of the souls that they eat or consume or whatever you call that.
They consume enough souls that they eventually gain some sort of partial. Something. Yeah, they gain something. There's a lot of dead souls in those things,
Yeah.
And so
you certainly learn the ability to say really weird stuff to people.
Mashadar is in and of itself pretty mindless until it links up with Padan Fain.
Gotcha.
I don't think it has any intelligence. As for the Black Wind, Fain seems to be able to command it a little bit. It seeks Rand. It's hard to really know what's going on with those. We can get into those more when we talk about traveling through the ways.
Oh yeah, that'll be a good one.
That will be a good one.
So now Manetheren becomes the front line. If you read through the series, even if you haven't done all this research, you know at least that Eredal, or modern day Shadar Logoth, is like kind of central northwest. Is that what we call that?
Sure.
East? Northeast?
Is it towards the ocean or towards the spine?
The ocean.
Then it is west.
Gotcha. Okay. So sort of central northwest of the coast, like below the borderlands, but pretty high up there. And Manetheren is where modern day Emond's Field is, and parts of Andor. So that is now the front line of the Trolloc Wars.
What was above Shadar Logoth? It was,
I believe it's called Aramel.
Aramel, and that is where the current day borderlands are, basically.
Right.
So that was probably Kendori?
Yeah, I think Arethel. This might be the closest, which would make a lot of sense.
That would make a lot of sense.
I have to look at a map really quick.
Let's pull out a book, look at the map.
I found a map, I don't know if this is right, but of the 10 nations, Aramel is directly north of Tarvalin. Jaramide, the nation that almost fell, is where modern-day Aridoman and Saldea are. It looks like that pretty large block there. Where Eredal is now, there is no nation.
Well, clearly.
Yeah, I guess that's obvious.
So it's basically north of Andor, sort of between Saldea and the two rivers?
Yeah, right in there. Shortly afterward, Manetheren gets their name as the Thorn in the Dark One's Foot, and elite band of soldiers is created, and it's named the Band of the Red Hand. This is the first time this happens.
Nothing's ever the first time something happens in the wheel.
Shortly after that, there are a few major battles where Manetheren does quite well, and a new dreadlord appears named Baal-Zaman, and he leads a host of Shadowspawn and other dreadlords against Manetheren personally here.
Now, at this point, Baal-Zaman is Ishmael, and
Right.
he's taken on a different name to lead the Trollocs. At this point, he is the Heart of the Dark, which is what the Trollocs call the Dark One, but he's sort of taken on that persona. And I would assume at this point he's kind of nuts enough to think he might actually be the Dark One.
I did wonder what the change in name meant, if it's just kind of something he fancies, but that doesn't seem like his style at all, or if he's going insane from using the true power.
I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it might also be the name he adopted simply to lead the Trollocs in the Trolloc War.
Or maybe the Trollocs gave it to him. I mean, his eyes burn with literal fire, or magical fire. Right. So it's pretty intimidating.
Yeah, a little. Yeah. He scares people. Let's put it that way. He's a professional creepy dude.
He scares shadow men.
So he's a little more effective than some of the other dark folk have been.
It looks like tremendously effective. He even seems to know, and we can assume he has the use of aerial spies and ravens and things like that. But he even seems to know that King Aemon is distracted on another front, which I'm not sure exactly where that is. We do know, and we see this story a couple of times throughout the series, that King Aemon rushes to meet Baal-Zaman immediately after a very tough battle, which is what makes this pretty famous. And he rushes to meet Baal-Zaman, and that culminates in the Battle of the Tarandrel, which is where the two forces meet on opposite sides of a river named the Tarandrel.
We get that from one of Matt's memories, right?
I think so. Yeah. Matt's first, I don't know what you call it, flashback or whatever, where they have to charge through the group of Trollocs, and Matt starts screaming in the Old Tongue. Oh. I'm pretty sure he forward the Heart Guard.
Forward the Heart Guard.
And King Aemon yells that at the Battle of Aemon's Field, which takes place directly after he retreats from the Tarandrel, which he holds for 9 days, and then one final day at Aemon's Field.
You left out the march.
The march to the Tarandrel.
Yeah.
It's a really cool part, but I did kind of leave it out.
All right.
After being driven back from the Tarandrel to the Battle of Aemon's Field, we see a huge number of civilians join the army to hold back the Shadowspawn for as long as they can. I see numbers somewhere around like 40 to 100,000. It's just civilians, just regular people joining the military.
Which rivals a lot of what happens in the Two Rivers later with Perrin when they're about to be overrun and the women step forward.
It's like almost the same story.
It's almost the same
It's just
story.
on a smaller scale.
Right, exactly.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So while Aemon's waiting there for the White Tower, the Ogier, and the 10 nations, any of whom to send some kind of help, we find that his messages were either tampered with or stopped completely by some rivals in the White Tower who wanted his wife, Queen Eldrine, to be killed, I suppose. I'm not phrasing that very well.
Do you think they were
black?
Black?
Maybe Black Aja.
So we know that Ishmael's around, obviously. He's the one creating this whole offensive, and we know he was one of the founding and guiding members of the Black Aja.
Yeah.
So my assumption is that at this point he is founding and creating the Black Aja, and they are the force behind this plot against.
I mean, that would make a ton of sense because it was some kind of like jealousy from when they were novices together or something between Eldrine and the Amerlin Seed at the time, whose name I should have, but I don't have it in front of me right now. Eventually we know that at least the Ogier do get the message that Aemon is waiting desperately for help, and he's going to hold the Trollocs for as long as he can. And he manages, I think, to last 10 or 11 days, and nobody comes.
And the Ogiers do get the message, but I assume they arrive too late.
We hear Loyal talk about it later. I think it's Loyal.
It's Loyal.
Where he like directly apologizes, I think, to Luz Theron.
Well, I think he apologizes to Rand and saying,
right.
He doesn't understand that Rand at the time doesn't really think about himself. Like, he thinks that Loyal has this sense of time that everyone is identifying. Rand saying, well, Manetheren, who the hell is Manetheren?
Yeah,
and meanwhile, Loyal's saying, like, I'm sorry, I have failed your ancestors.
I'm sorry, we arrived too slowly.
Yeah,
he says something like that.
Exactly.
It was yeah.
And Rand's like,
he's like feeling real sadness about it.
Right.
That was a long time ago.
That wasn't. Rand's basically like, that wasn't me or
but
my
for an
family.
Ogier, that's like a generation and a half or two generations. How long do they live? A long time.
A long time.
Like longer than an Aes Sedai, right?
I feel like it was well, he was 90 and he was just coming out of adolescence at 90. And so if you think that's the equivalent of like 18, which is what Rand is, figure he lives 5 times that long. Ogier 400, 500 years old is an old, very old Ogier. 600 would be ancient.
Yeah, so we'd be talking like only like 3 generations. That would be like me apologizing for
my grandfather failing somebody, and
which sort of makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
Like there's at least a kind of generational memory.
Loyal may have known someone who
was there. Yeah.
And failed.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Because your grandfather.
Right.
And his grandparents may have been of the age.
Aemon, possibly betrayed by the Red Aja, who tampers with his messages and doesn't get help on time, and is eventually killed at the Battle of Aemon's Field, which is his last stand, which is why the field was named after him. Queen Eldrine, who was bonded with a warder bond to King Aemon, senses his death and immediately pulls a Lews Therin Telamon and destroys herself, the city she's in, and the majority of the shadow spawn that have invaded her land by drawing in so much of the one power that she...
Oopsie.
And like I said, it includes the city. That's why it's not there anymore.
Right.
So it's just blown off the mountain.
Aemon is killed at Aemon's Field, but she is in the city of Manetheren.
Right.
And so when she wipes Manetheren off the face of the earth, that is not where Aemon's Field is.
Yeah. Rand, Perrin, and Matt talk about this, but I think it took them 2 days to walk there, or 3 days. Healthy farm boys.
No,
So they're 50 miles.
50 to 75 miles.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or 2 days to, I think they get to the feet of the mountains. They don't actually climb them.
Right.
Well, anyway. So Queen Eldrine pulls an LTT, blows the city off the mountain, and kills lots of the shadow spawn who were there.
All the shadow spawn that were there, right?
I think almost all of them.
Okay.
But we do see that shortly afterward, a new Amyrlin is raised named Rashima, and she spends the next 50 years essentially hunting down any large groups of shadow spawn that are still roaming around. This is pretty much the end of the war here.
Well, and we have to assume Ishmael got sucked back into the boar.
Possibly. He may have been destroyed. I don't think we know.
Ishmael? Well, I mean...
He may have been destroyed right there. I don't see him after that.
Right. I mean, well, but he wasn't destroyed, was he? I mean, he didn't die.
I don't have any mention of him after the Battle of Aemon's Field.
Until he returns in...
It seems like he should be able to protect himself.
Right.
But I would like to think that Eldrine just...
You want to think she killed him and he got reincarnated in another body?
Good. But I don't know.
I don't think so.
That's the truth or
yeah,
not.
because I think he's suffering from thousands of years of true power abuse in the Eye of the World. I don't think he's put in a new body.
Oh no, I don't think he is.
Yeah, and the Dark One's sealed away at that point, so he can't. He must survive.
Oh right, as opposed to having been reborn, which is we know doesn't happen.
Right.
So he has to have survived.
He has to have survived.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, she definitely just stops his plans. And since he appears to only really have these 40-year windows to get anything done, in between every 1,000 years, he's sucked back in until his next emergence.
After the end of these really large battles, we see Rashima hunting down over the next 50 years any small bands of shadow spawn that are still roaming around the Westlands, and we see five of the 10 nations remaining who are weakened from 300 years of war break into 29 separate monarchies after a generation of factional infighting. And that's when the calendar switches and begins what's called the Free Years, which I assume are called the Free Years because it's just like a kind of Wild West cowboy style, all these little duchies and monarchies fighting each other. Because they weren't free or fun, it doesn't seem.
I mean, you're free from a single overarching ruler. You don't have an Aurtur Hawkwing. You don't have an Armelin dictating things to everybody. You just have, well, my queen says this, and your queen says that. And since we all live on about 5 acres of land...
freedom from laws.
Right.
Freedom to take your neighbor's land.
I mean, think about it. 29 nations in a place the size of the U.S., they're basically states.
Yeah.
You essentially have a bunch of fighting states, nation states.
During this time, it was a very unstable time where there's very little information. I know we keep repeating that, but there's really almost none here. I have in free year 291 is the first point I have. Blight continues to expand, swallows an important steading called Sharon-Du. But for the first 500 years, basically, we see lots of infighting between the human nations and very little cooperation.
Trading.
Yeah, and like I suggested last time, perhaps memory, like a sort of a basic memory of a time when nothing like that would have existed. So I think combat is sort of becoming normalized, like combat against humans. That's just happening all the time now.
Well, I mean, we're 1,000 years, 2,000 years past the breaking now.
But yes, yeah, a little more than that.
Figure at this point,
it's been a very long time.
It's been a long time. Figure the Romans rediscovered how to fight. I think we have a pretty good idea of how to do it by now.
You're right. So by free year 500, it's been at least 500 years since any of the 10 original nations formed after the breaking were even existed.
Right.
That would have people would have just looked at that at ancient times. Stories about when things were peaceful that probably aren't even true.
Right.
And then this is a good thing to throw in there as well. In free year 642, there's an event called the Great Fire of Tarvalin, which apparently damaged much of the White Tower Library, and many of the records that existed at the time were destroyed. That may be another reason we have almost nothing here.
I think that's Robert Jordan's excuse for why we have nothing here.
Got lazy.
I'm just not going to write this history. All the records burned.
The records were destroyed.
Moving on.
Maybe it was the Great Fire of his kitchen table. It's like, oh fuck, there goes a month of work.
I know Robert Jordan made all those notes, and then he like spilled hot soup on them or something. Set them down on a hot stove. Whoosh. Great Fire 600. Moving on.
And the next important point I found is in free year 912, Aurtur Pendrag Tenreal is born, near where modern-day Cairhien is.
Who's that?
Aurtur Hawkwing. But he hasn't earned that name yet. Which I didn't know until I did this research, that it was a nickname that he earned in combat. Hawkwing.
Why?
It's not his real name. Because of the speed with which he can move his armies. He seems to be uncanny at predicting where his enemies will be, and he's usually there before.
So he moves like a hawk on the wing.
Right.
It's
as if he flew there.
Oh, wow. So he's born, which, he becomes a fairly significant figure in history, very... Alexander the Great, sort of, if I had an equivalent in our modern day society, sort of the most recent person to conquer everything.
Yeah. Or, maybe one of the Persian emperors, but he seems to run his show in a similar style. He's later called a high king because he'll leave the monarchies in place and let them run their empire for him.
Isn't that just an emperor versus high king?
No, not necessarily. Different conquerors do it differently. Some of them will destroy and make sure that you're following their system of government. But these some of these early conquerors like Alexander and if I could think of some of the Persian names, but it doesn't matter. They would literally just make someone submit, and you could just go home. You could just go home and pay taxes, and if we want men to show up for a military maneuvers, send them. That's it.
So it's basically protection money.
Right. It's like a gangster.
Yeah.
You pay us to not kill you, and you can do your thing.
Why does it not surprise me that essentially the earliest form of government was being a gangster?
It's such a natural thing. It just pops up.
And let's be honest, does politics really change?
No, it just becomes more sophisticated. It's really the same thing.
I don't find much difference between gangsters and politicians.
You don't pay taxes? We come take your house.
Exactly. Exactly. Protection money, the IRS.
Be a shame if someone were to set fire to it. In free year 939, the Black Fever kills roughly 10% of all humans in the Westland, including Arthur's parents, who were at the time the monarchs of a small nation called Chandel, which I think I already mentioned is in modern-day Western Cairien, with maybe about half the size of Cairien. So Arthur becomes king of the small nation at 27. At around the same time, and this is very important as well, the War of the Second Dragon breaks out, where a false dragon named Gwaihir Amalasan.
That works.
This war breaks out, and the White Tower begins to try to organize some of these small nations to help defend each other. Chandel joins, and Arthur quickly earns the nickname the Hawkwing for the speed with which he can move his armies during that war and in some of the opening conflicts, which culminates with, at the end, with the aid of several Aes Sedai, Hawkwing captures Amalasan at the Battle of Jolvain Pass. Then shortly afterward, we see the Battle of Tarvalin, where Amalasan's followers and his generals bring 100,000 soldiers right up to the Shining Walls and attempt to free the captured false dragon, who they think is the real dragon, which, of course, Hawkwing being Hawkwing, finds a way and defeats them.
Of course he does. He seems to be the Matt Cawthon of the age. He can pretty much...
He really is. I wonder how many of Hawkwing's memories Matrim has.
I don't know. He definitely has some, though. Well, no, he doesn't, because he says he doesn't like the man very much. He remembers not liking the man.
I think he has a lot of memories for one of Hawkwing's generals.
Right. But I don't think he has any of Hawkwing's.
I was just reading Tuan's wiki page, and part of a foretelling she gets from a Domain is that you will marry a man who remembers Aurtur Hawkwing's face. Right. And it was like a 3-part foretelling. I don't remember all of it, but that was one of the lines. And he remembers talking to Hawkwing and working with him.
Totally.
And really not liking him.
Yeah. What a dick.
He was kind of a dick.
But, in fairness, Matt doesn't like a lot of people.
True.
Anyone who follows rules or has order, and Hawkwing was definitely about rules and order. That was his whole empire. So I don't think there's any way Matt could like Aurtur Hawkwing. They're just these two sort of opposing personalities. And that being said, they do sort of have a little moment at the end when he's like, hey, can you go say hi to my wife? She might think that's pretty cool. And Hawkwing's like, yeah, I'll go say hi to your wife. And it's a little bit of star power, right? Go dazzle her. Also, maybe don't torture Aes Sedai, right? That's probably not a good thing.
And Tuan is his great so on granddaughter.
That's true. Yeah, she is related, which is why she's Empress. But I think it's important to mention that, like, Hawkwing, I think he regrets some of the things he did in his life because he was definitely corrupted by Ishmael, and sort of the person he was when he died, who was very anti-Aes Sedai, is not the person I think he is in death and when he's called by the horn. Yeah. I think the person he was when he died was definitely corrupted. And so if you look at him when he comes back, he's a much greater respect for the Aes Sedai. And hopefully that comes across when he does actually talk to Toulon.
In Free Year 943, sources have it that after some disagreements, the White Tower either pressures or convinces or sort of stokes the fire of some tensions between Aurtur's home nation, Shandel, and some of his neighbors, which eventually cues those neighbors to attack Shandel, which begins the period of consolidation. And how nicely and gently that period is named.
I'm going to consolidate these two nations into one.
The period of consolidation. We just put it together. Yeah. Well.
Oh, I'm sure that was 100% peaceful, right?
So these, I believe it was 3 separate nations attack Shandel, and were quickly rebuffed by Hawkwing, which began a long conflict where Aurtur Hawkwing took over the entire continent, or perhaps used the White Tower's involvement with these 3 nations attacking it as a justification, essentially, to destroy any nation that attacked it, including the White Tower. And it largely worked in Free Year 963. I don't know why I'm saying largely. And Aurtur Hawkwing was completely successful, or almost entirely successful. He never took the White Tower itself.
Do we know if he lost any battles? I mean, I think he sieged the White Tower, but I don't think he necessarily...
He didn't lose. He died.
Right.
Yeah. Of an illness, not on the battlefield. There are some other interesting failures. I have in Free Year 963, Aurtur Hawkwing is declared the High King of the West. In Free Year 964, he begins an invasion of the Aiel Waste, which there isn't a terrible lot of information about, but the little bit of information that I could find on it was that essentially the Aiel clans refused to engage Aurtur Hawkwing at all through small skirmishes and other sort of baiting. They just got him to march his army deeper and deeper into the waste. Eventually, for a reason that I could not find, I assume he eventually saw what the ruse was, what the Aiel were pulling, and he just turned around and left.
Well, that's smarter than Germany invading Russia, because...
It was very smart.
Yeah.
I see what they were doing, and it was a clever maneuver. Good try, Aielman.
Whereas a dumber general may just continue to throw troops, and I'm surprised he didn't lose a lot of troops. I'm sure he must have lost a ton in the waste with the heat and the marching and the sand and the lack of water.
I don't see how you could transport enough water.
Yeah, there's just no way. So I imagine that if nothing else, just the lack of water is what was killing his troops and forcing him to turn back.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Jordan may have been drawing a parallel to invading Russia, and instead of
Napoleon,
just any general invading Russia, we can cite multiple examples throughout history, has pretty much failed because of the weather and the cold and the environment. You walk in with a lot of troops and you walk out with very few. And
Red in Russia, they have a sort of saying, or not really a saying, but that sometimes Russian historians call it General Winter because of what an important role this general, I'm air quoting, has played in so many major Russian conflicts, just the winter itself.
And I think you can, call the heat a very equivalent.
Totally, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, the polar opposite. Yeah, I think that's where he drew from to sort of create that situation. But Aurtur Hawkwing was smarter and, turned and ran tail before he lost too many of his troops.
Yeah. I wonder if they were trying to cut him off.
I think just draw him far enough into the waste and eventually they just all die.
And come around.
Yeah.
And don't let them leave.
Yeah. I don't think the Aiel have to engage at all. I think that they just have to cut off his escape route, get him lost in the desert, and let the threefold land test them.
Hmm. So that's what the Aiel do when you invade. Yeah. Nothing. Which is sort of funny.
I mean, it's
when we know about their nature.
They're a nomadic people. They're not protecting land. They don't have fortresses. And they can outrun your horses. So,
and also just at this point, their general or clan chiefs would have been highly skilled in their combat tactics, and these are clever warriors. There's no reason to engage.
No.
There's no.
And these Aiel have been fighting each other in skirmishes for generations at this point. They are exceptionally good with the spear. You know, we talked about how they'd split into three. The Tinkers at this point are pretty independent. The Gen Aiel are long gone. And what you're left with is the 12 clans of Aiel who are in constant combat. And they're good at it. They're really good at it.
986, Ishmael appears during this time under the name Jalwyn Moread. Moread. Moread.
I feel like that's a sort of related to his original name of Morin, is his middle name originally.
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely a vague resemblance to his original name, but it's not the same. And what is he doing? He appears as a what?
In the court of Aurtur Hawkwing. And geez, I don't have this, but we know that he quickly becomes like an advisor to Aurtur Hawkwing, a close personal advisor.
I wonder if there's a little compulsion involved there.
Why not?
Yeah. Sort of in the way that Morghese gets Gabriel as her close personal lover almost immediately upon meeting him.
After this, we can see his touch pretty much everywhere. I also have that. I have in Free Year 986, a bunch of shadow spawns start pouring out of the Blight. Free Year 987, defeated decisively. So maybe that invasion was triggered by Ishmael, but he doesn't seem to have any effect over Hawkwing just yet.
I can see it perhaps as, this is a guess, but my guess is Ishmael is trying to boost Hawkwing's power because he finds himself as the power behind the throne. So he wants Hawkwing to conquer more and more. And by having Trollocs invade and then having Hawkwing stop them, that gives him
even more credibility
and the ability to, take over more of the land.
After this, Hawkwing decides to overrun the forces of Tarvalon and lay siege to the city, which he has been at war with this entire time, but has left, presumably, and has never conquered the city of Tarvalon itself.
So how does that work out for him?
As far as not losing any troops, there doesn't seem to be very much combat at all.
How long is the siege?
A long time. The next point I have is during the siege, the Amerlin at the time is deposed. She's the one that they depose and still her and make her work as a scullery maid for the next couple of years until she dies. I assume, and it seems like other fan theory seems to favor this, is that this was done to placate Hawkwing, largely because the Amerlin had made this huge mistake in getting involved and fighting this guy, and because they were completely surrounded and slowly starving. This was done 7 years or 6 years after Hawkwing begins the siege. So they may have been getting desperate at this point. I really hope I'm getting all these dates and everything right, but
we're doing the best we can.
Maybe someone will send us corrections at some point. I'd like to hear them. Seriously. We're alone out here.
Right. Yeah. There is so much going on in this series that between the two of us, we know maybe 80% of it, if I'm being really generous.
I've also had some of my sources conflict. I tried to make note of that when I could, but it's usually by a couple of years, but I don't really. I figure if I'm getting it close, it's fine.
Well, and if you think in the world of the Wheel of Time, there's been a lot of records destroyed. There may be some conflicting dates just in the historical records.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or maybe the companion isn't the best source of information.
No, I mean, I've seen that conflict with information in the books, and it's impossible to get all this right, realistically.
Right. Even for the authors, there are times that they make mistakes. So, forgive us. But yeah, like I said, please let us know.
So the then Emerlin is deposed, and Hawkwing gives literally no shits. He does not back off the siege. He's not placated by that at all. However, in free year 994, 995, Aurtur's son disappears, and his daughter dies under mysterious circumstances. Aurtur falls ill and dies suddenly. This kicks off the War of the 100 Years, which is essentially the end of the era.
So do we just assume Ishmael offed him and his 2 children?
Yeah.
Yeah. That there's just, he was like, now that the empire is formed, I'm going to absolutely destroy it by causing complete chaos.
The War of the 100 Years is kicked off when Tyr and Cairhien declare independence from the empire. Andor was next, and then the Borderlands left the empire as a 5-nation bloc. So they always seem sort of united, at least with each other.
The Borderlands?
Right.
Yeah.
Against the Blight.
When you've got a common enemy, it's pretty easy to stay together. Well, easier to stay together, at least.
Yeah.
And they're less worried about the Game of Thrones, the Game of Houses, and more worried about staying alive.
Yeah, even in modern times. Take a break.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sure.
So instead of taking a short break, we went to the bar, got something to eat, and, a drink.
Or 2.
So we're going to give this a shot and see how this sounds. If not,
Yeah. The goal here is to finish up right up until chapter 1. So we can actually talk about the events of our main characters. So that's something I've been anticipating for 5 whole pages.
Oh, but I'm enjoying this.
I am enjoying
I love this stuff.
I love. I think you're a little more into the history than I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I am. Yeah, I think I am.
I think you are, because
I like the backstories.
Just the podcast you listen to too.
Should I? I was especially excited to get to this section because after the War of the 100 Years, like I said, the new era begins, and there's basically a really long, like a 500-year period of conflicts and secession wars, like 0 long-lived Amerlins. I went through the list a couple of times, and like none survives more than like 50 years or something absurd. You maybe find 1 or 2 examples, but it's like almost none.
And this is after Ishmael founded the Black Aja. So,
right.
My opinion of this era was always that Ishmael was, certainly no longer around, but at least his influence was attempting to destabilize the White Tower. And by destabilizing the White Tower, he destabilized society.
Yeah. And you can definitely see that in that 500-year period. But to kick off the ending of that shitty 500-year period, shitty, it didn't seem like a good time. The Aiel, after I didn't find too much information on their exact reasoning, but at this point, the Aiel clans decide to deliver a cutting of Avendesora, which I think is called Avendaladora.
Well, the reason was they had been in the wandering after the breaking, when they wandered and hadn't split into the 3 groups. They basically needed water, and the only folks that took them in, water and food and shelter, and the folks who took them in were the Cairhien. After they split from the Cairhien and continued on to the waste, they didn't know who the people were who helped them.
Right.
And so what happened was, at this point in history, they discovered that the Cairhien, the ancient Cairhien, were the folks who had helped them during the breaking. And so the Aiel felt they had tow towards the Cairhien. And in order to discharge the tow, they granted them a cutting of the Aviendesora. Do we talk much about the Chora trees and what they were and where they came from in the Age of Legends? I feel like that's something we haven't really gotten into a little bit.
No, I don't think we have. We might have in the Age of Legends.
So in the Age of Legends, the chora trees were planted along most of the streets, and essentially induced a feeling of contentment among the populace. There was a little bit of an artificial, just sort of beneath these trees, you feel content, and they were planted on every street.
Have like an artificial drug-like radius,
right?
Essentially,
right. So it's pretty much. And if you've gotten into Brandon Sanderson, for those of you who finished this series and then read some of his stuff, to me it seems a lot like soothing. Is that sort of feeling of contentment is one of the emotions you can push or pull on. Sort of like the chora trees are sort of an artificial push on
your sense of joy or contentment.
Yeah, and maybe a bit of a pull on your anxiety and your discontentment. As the Aiel were traveling with the Aes Sedai, they traveled with items of power, and every caravan carried a chora tree with them for good luck. And those chora trees came with them to the waste, and the only one that ended up surviving was Avien de Sora, which became the Tree of Life. As a reward, they did take a cutting and gave it to Layman, to the Kyrian.
Right. We can assume was accepted by Laman, who they would have seen as the chief of the Kyrian or Kyrianen.
Well, wouldn't he have come along couple hundred years later?
Oh, right. So he would have inherited this.
Yes. Right. So they gave it to the Kyrian, and then it matured as a tree and was something that was around for several hundred years.
Looking at my notes really quick, it's about 450 years later.
About 450 years later, right.
I also want to note that in New Year 705, Cadsuane Meladrin is born, which means that when we get to chapter 1, she's been alive for about 300 years. I just wanted to throw that out there, like a little while after the Aiel, a couple generations after the Aiel deliver the cutting to the Kyrianen, Cadsuane is born.
Well, she's about as old as Aes Sedai can get. Why can't Aes Sedai get any older?
The Oathrod.
Yeah. The most powerful channelers can live 600 to 800 years. However, by swearing on the Oathrod, their lifespan is cut in half. And so the oldest Aes Sedai live to just over 300 years. Some of the more powerful ones may be able to live to 400 years, but we don't really have any examples of those because no one's really in Nynaeve's power range.
And Cadsuane is seen as the most powerful Aes Sedai in many centuries until Nynaeve.
I thought it was until maybe Elida and Moraine. Oh no, you're right.
I think they come close.
Yeah, no, they're a step below her.
Yeah.
And
I looked at the power ratings and stuff, which I don't really have a good understanding of, but there's some contention there when you're reading different sources as to whether Egwene is as powerful as Cadsuane or just under, and how powerful is Cadsuane without all her secret tricks.
Right.
Nobody really knows.
Well, I always saw Cadsuane as the sort of Moraine replacement. Once Moraine disappeared, we needed an advisor to Rand, who was...
Yeah, and she's right there.
And she sort of steps into that role. Not that I find her the same as Moraine. I find them both very different characters, but at the same time, very compelling, in a similar manner, as sort of powerful women characters who are able to step up and...
Really excellent examples of what an Aes Sedai should probably be.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd say if there were two characters who exemplify Aes Sedai, it is Moraine and Cadsuane.
And Cadsuane does have a way of showing up at the moment important events are really kicking off. I was reading one of the wiki articles on her life, and she was retired twice, and she the second time she retires, she's like, I'm going to Geldin and I'm going to trim roses for the rest of my life. And then the Aiel War breaks out and she's just there. And she can't keep herself away.
And yet she ends up as the Armelin seat.
Eventually.
Yeah. It's like, dude, Cadsuane, just Just
accept.
chill. Like you've done enough.
Maybe she did all this teaching to Rand about accepting his fate and being okay with it, and she maybe taught herself.
I don't think I've ever seen an Aes Sedai take their own advice in my life. I don't think she's going to start. She's going to fight that as hard as she can.
She's great. Maybe we could do one on her one day.
Oh, definitely. Well, that's going to be much later when she shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now that she's been born, we're not going to talk about her again for 300 years.
And 250 years after the birth of Cat Swain. That's not a calendar, but it probably could be.
AC.
In 955 of the New Era, Malkier falls, which I'm pointedly not talking about because that should probably be a part of an episode and all by itself. Lan is born just 2 or 3 years before the Blight begins to expand, and for various political reasons and other influences, the Empire falls apart at just the right time. The military is unavailable, and that's it. It goes to the Trollocs.
Oh, can I tell you? So I was recently on Reddit, the R Wheel of Time, the WOT subreddit, and there was a pun thread.
A what thread?
A pun thread.
Okay.
And it started. It was. What do you call a fade wearing lipstick?
What?
Quite fetching.
And
so I had to contribute. And so my pun was, what do you call a group of warders playing video games?
What?
A LAN party.
Oh, terrible.
But I felt pretty clever coming up with that one.
LAN party.
A LAN party. Anyway, sorry, you were talking about LAN, so I had to bring that one up.
I like it. Keep it. So in New Era 957, Pedro Neal leads the children to invade Altara, beginning the White Cloak War, which I really wanted to mention largely because Murundi and Ilian send aid fairly quickly, and a young Tamlin Althor arrives on the scene. And he becomes a pretty important player because this is just the last 40 years before the events of the main book.
Right, we're really seeing the characters in our main story start to develop as people and start to take their place in society, and sort of some of their backstory is taking place in the next 40 years.
So Rand's father is a young man now, and he's still an untested infantryman.
And, you know, Jordan's original concept was to have his main protagonist be a man returning from war. So in a lot of ways, Tam's backstory, it's not Rand's backstory, but it was sort of meant to be in a lot of ways. So I sort of think of Tam as if Rand hadn't been the hero.
There could have been a book about Tam.
Oh my God. I would have loved to hear about Tam's adventures during the Aiel War. I think that would be an amazing book.
And at that point, he would have been a second captain of the Ilian Companions, which was one of these... Each of the monarchies seems to have one. They're like a bodyguard unit of the monarch, essentially. Like, these are the crack special op units.
An elite fighting force. And so he was, obviously good enough to be gifted with a Blade Master's blade, which I think was given to him by the King of Ilion. I mean, where else would he get a blade like that?
I believe Robert Jordan said that. It was given to him.
Yes.
But doesn't Tam say at some point he did duel a Blade Master?
I think he said he bought it at one point, and then he talks about how that wasn't worth the cost.
Right. But that's a Aes Sedai truth.
Right.
He bought it with the death of a man.
Well, did he actually fight a Blade Master and kill him, or did he prove himself in combat and was granted the blade by 5 Blade Masters? So there are 2 ways to get a Heron Mark blade. You can kill somebody who's a Blade Master, or you can be granted the blade by 5 other Blade Masters.
No, I don't think Tam ever said anything quite so detailed. I think he said things like he bought it and the price was too high, like you said, and something like he earned it because it had to be done. Something along those lines. Like he did what had to be done and earned this blade. It wasn't he wasn't clear. So I always interpreted that as he killed a man. But now that you're saying that could totally apply to, like, he did his duty in the military and was awarded this blade. He killed a bunch of people, likely, which is with the price he's talking about.
I once saw some speculation that he killed Layman.
Himself?
Yeah. But it was speculation. I do think the Aiel killed Layman, but I thought it was fun speculation that, like, the idea that, like, he saw what the Aiel were after and decided to end the war by dueling Layman and giving them to the Aiel. And that's how he earned his, like, Blade Master. I think it doesn't fit the canon at all, but I thought it was in the timeline. Like, it doesn't work as a theory, but I thought it was a really interesting theory. And, like, for a second, I wanted it to be true.
New Era 970, Ilian and Tyr duke it out on the first of many border wars that we hear about later. That's where Tam is promoted to second captain of the Ilian Companions. New Era 972, Galad is born to Tigraine. She receives the maiden foretelling that we'll hear a lot more about later. Heads off to the Aiel Waste to follow through with that. And Andor descends into a bunch of chaotic secession wars. Morghese finally takes the throne. New Era 975, Lamin Sin. This is where he cuts the tree. The very next year, 976, Janduin convinces 4 clans to execute Lamin for this terrible sin of murdering the sacred tree.
So why did he cut the tree down?
I believe it had something to do with his throne feeling unstable. He wanted to make a big show of what a powerful ruler he was, and he would have the most beautiful, elaborate throne ever made.
I thought there was something else to it, but
there could be a lot more.
Yeah. Let us know if there was more to it. I may have missed something there.
It was something equally foolish.
Right. Layman's an idiot.
He never seemed like a very good ruler.
He's a lame man. Layman.
Only a year and possibly some months, but probably about 1 year after the cutting of, I believe, which it was now named Avendaladora because it was its own tree. 90,000 Aiel warriors pour across the Dragon Wall, descend upon Cairhien, and sack it in short order. And they set its 2 towers alight like 2 giant candles and glowing in the night. So we're breaking into the Aiel War here.
Well, Tam fought some other battles before the Aiel War, didn't he?
The White Cloak War.
The White Cloak War, yeah.
The border conflicts between Ilian and Tyr, and then the Aiel War.
Mm-hmm.
But we can assume that, especially with these border conflicts, he was probably pretty active throughout this. I think it's about a 15-year period that he served.
Right.
It may have even be a little longer than that.
Yeah, pretty much constant conflict, sort of in a similar style to the Aiel and their clan. Tribe wars, sort of this just sort of constant back and forth. Not really a lot of deaths, but a lot of fighting going on.
Yeah, he had a real lifelong military career.
Yeah, and then he before he came home, where did he meet Caryalthor?
I didn't see too terribly much on that, but I know that she's Andoran. I know that she had red hair, but many Andorans do.
Right.
So that was one reason why nobody ever really questioned where Rand came from.
But he definitely met her while he was serving in the alien army.
Beforehand.
So, right.
It's mentioned that he found the baby laying in the bloodied snow, found this newborn baby, and he knew that his wife very much wanted a child. I always interpreted that as she couldn't conceive.
I agree.
And he saw this child that needed his help, and he just thought, well, I'll take him home.
Right. No, I feel like Rand...
It's going to die out here.
Rand would have had brothers and sisters if Carrie Althor could have conceived.
Yeah. We also know she died shortly after coming to the Two Rivers. I don't know. There's nothing in there really implies trouble with conception, but maybe that was the issue.
That makes sense, that they were trying to have more
children. It would tie together a few strings there. So that's my speculation on that.
Sure.
I liked a couple things in here. Cairhien is largely sacked. Laman narrowly escapes to Tyr, which lends him soldiers on the condition that he flee to the north to draw the Aiel away from Tyr and hopefully thin out their supply line, which we know is ridiculous now because the Aiel don't use a supply line. Laman is pursued by the impossibly fast-moving Aiel clans all the way to Tar Valon, where they find and summarily execute Laman. The Aiel immediately cease fighting and return to the Threefold Land because their mission is completed.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a war for them. It was an execution. Oh. Yeah, if he hadn't run away, very few people would have died. He had tow.
I know that he was a clan chief. Was it his clan and 4 other clans that crossed the Dragon Wall, or was it his clan and 3 others? Done.
I thought it was just 4 clans in total.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it wasn't 5 clans.
So it would be his clan.
His clan and 3 others, yeah.
Do you remember which, out of curiosity?
No idea.
And during that battle in front of Tar Valon, which was later named the Battle of the Shining Walls, an attachment of elite soldiers was sent by Ilion to remove a group of spear maidens from which had planted itself on Dragon Mount. The second captain, Tamlin Elthor, finds an infant laying in the bloodied snow in the aftermath of the battle and takes the child back to camp with him. The war's now over, of course, and he returns with his red-haired Andoran wife to the Two Rivers.
The woman who gave birth to Rand in the blood snow was a maiden of the spear, and she became a maiden of the spear not because she was an Aiel,
right,
but because she had crossed the spine of the world, because she started out life as Tigraine.
Her name is now Shael or Shael.
Yeah, Shael is what I would say. And so her life is kind of crazy. She was a mother and a princess and was told by an Aes Sedai through a foretelling that she had to give it all up and flee to the waste or the world would end.
So she is the mother of the Dragon Reborn. And what is Galad's title? The first protector of Andor? Or he has a special title, right?
That's Gawain's title.
Oh, what's Galad?
Galad isn't anything.
He's a very important Andoran noble.
Right. and later the white head of the White Cloaks.
Right.
You know, one of my favorite bait and switches in the series is that you really set up to like Gawain in the beginning and hate Galad. But by the end of the series, man, I fucking hate Gawain and love Galad.
I always imagine his like hair is always like over one eye. Seriously, the way he acts, he just fits that.
Gawain or Galad?
Gawain.
Yeah, totally. With like kind of curly, like.
Yeah,
totally.
So he's like never really looking at you, like one of those moves. Cut that.
Fuck that
guy. But one of those people.
One of those people.
New Era 983. We see evidence that Ishmael has begun work with the Black Aja again. New Era 984. Tarangale de Madrid is assassinated by Tom Marilyn, who's Morgase's lover.
Go back a little bit. I want to know about this evidence. Hold on. We'll get to Tom.
Oh, I'd have to look.
Okay.
I just see that he reappears on the scene. I just thought I'd throw it out there because we're close.
This early? I thought he didn't appear until significantly later.
983. Yeah, that's what I had.
Yeah, 3 years. Wow. That's after Rand's born, right?
Slightly before. Oh, wait. No. Oh, no.
No, after.
No. So loud. Aaron, son of Milan, son of Senar. By the way, this is straight out of the Wheel of Time wiki. I'm just going to read this out loud to you and see what you think. Had a theory based on Ishmael being thrown out and touching the world for specific periods of time. Aaron had heard claims that people had encountered him as long as 40 years after the sealing of the bore. Using lost manuscripts, Aaron concluded it might have taken some time for Ishmael to be brought into the prison with the remainder of the Forsaken, and it might possibly have been thrown out in a regular cycle. There is ample evidence now to show support for this hypothesis, such as interviews from Dark Friends saying that as early as 983 New Era, they were receiving instructions from someone calling himself Baal Zaman. Here on the fan wiki, it's saying Ishmael's final cycle of freedom occurred as the seals on the Dark One's prison were weakening, resulting in him being permanently released from the Dark One's prison in 997. At some point, before the other Forsaken were released, he was informed by the Black Aja that the dragon had been reborn. That's a little annoying.
It doesn't seem like there's any evidence that he was released that early.
It sounds like speculation.
Yeah, it sounds like he was released around 997, shortly before the Eye of the World.
Because I'm a big fan of the character, New Era 984, Tarangel de Madrid is assassinated by Tom Marilyn, who's Morgase's lover.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a tricky bastard, isn't he?
Well, I looked into it a little, and it sounds like Tom believed that Tarangel was going to assassinate Morgase and killed him first.
Good for him.
And we've got to believe him because he's pretty much always right.
Yeah, he understands what's going on behind the scenes all the time.
The Gray Fox. I'll go over this quickly, but around that time in 984, there's this incident with the Red Aja and Tom's nephew. Now, I want to mention that people who have read this will know what I'm talking about, and this is the reason Tom mistrusts Aes Sedai, is because Owen is gentled outside of Tower Law. Tom, in Morgase's court, confronts Elaida publicly, and this triggers a meeting at the Hall of the Sitters, where the Red Sitters are exiled from the Tower. This event becomes known as the Vileness. It looks like that happens by 988. And at this point, Swan is raised Amerlin after the death of 3 Amerlins in a short period of time. We don't know exactly what happens there, but there's clearly a lot of bad tension in the Tower with these Red Sitters being exiled, and the reason likely Swan is raised, who's very young and very powerful.
They're sick of them dying. I think they all died because they were old.
Really?
That was actually like an issue. That's why they went with someone who was so young. Yeah. Because the last 3 had died because they were just ancient.
So I think she's only 50 or 60 years old at this point.
Well, I think she's only 50 or 60 at the beginning of the series in Eye of the World.
Yeah, so she may be even younger at this point.
Yeah.
Between New Era 993 and 997, 3 false dragons in Kandor, Eredamon, and Ilion declare themselves and are eventually caught and gentled.
The pattern is crying out for a dragon.
In New Era 996, Padden Fane is summoned to Shale Ghul and remade by the Dark One to be his hound. And in 998, Loghain, another false dragon, is captured.
So we're getting right up to the beginning of the Eye of the World here. These are sort of the last events leading up to the rumors that we hear in Chapter 1.
Right. The very last rumor that does happen before the book begins.
Padden Fane brings the rumor of war. Right. And that's war in Geldon, yeah.
So, So as we get to Chapter 3, the folks in the Two Rivers are essentially hearing very old news.
Right. Right, and that's what's going on at this point.
Funny.
Yeah.
They're all worried about it. It's over.
it's done. Tom laughs at them, basically. Mm-hmm. He's like, that's old news. Even in Barillon, which is the last place, well, maybe not the last place.
He says something just like that, yeah. Well,
I guess you guys are the last place to
I guess there are some people underneath rocks that haven't heard this yet.
Right, yeah. But it's over with. So that's old history. But that pretty much catches us up to the beginning of Chapter 1.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of characters scattered all over the world doing their thing, and we'll meet them one by one and go into their history in a little more depth. And say thank you to the response we've gotten. I do want to say something about the number of downloads that we've gotten online for less than an hour of content.
I've been surprised, sort of overwhelmed, but it's not like a huge amount of activity, but to like have any is kind of surprising.
I just, we posted one episode and we were expecting like 5 downloads
for
total.
like over 3 days. The amount of downloads doubled
each
day.
It was just incredible.
Just by the third day, I was like,
how long is this going to keep going? And then interested. I think that shows just how much interest there is in the series, that the two guys sitting at their kitchen table can and talking for an hour can get a bunch of attention almost immediately.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, let's keep this thing going. I am really excited to see what they're going to do with the TV show.
Me too. And simultaneously excited and sort of dreading when something terrible comes out.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, now this is what everybody thinks of this wonderful fantasy series.
That I know, but I'm going to maintain a positive attitude about this because the rest of the world sucks. So I'm basically going to assume that that my favorite thing is going to be given the treatment it deserves. If only. All right. So here's my philosophy.
Okay.
Harriet picked Brandon Sanderson. Harriet picked the guy who's running the show.
She was right once.
Yeah. I trust Harriet.
And I was thinking while you were saying that just now, this is the same thing that I said about the Sanderson books. I was like, I'm prepared to be disappointed,
sure,
but I have to see it anyway.
Right.
So of course I'm going to watch the series. I'm just, I guess, withholding judgment because I'm afraid to get my hopes up.
I'm still WWHD. What would Harriet do?